folks, welcome back for another Feature Friday. I'm your host Ryan Glover, and this week we're going to be learning how to manage state across routes. So one of the things that I'm currently working on inside of Command, the upcoming SaaS from Clever Beagle, is allowing users who don't have an account on the site to leave feedback like comments and votes on different features and things that they're interested in on a product's public roadmap. And one of the problems that I've needed to solve is getting a user in order for those users to comment and vote. So somebody who came in from maybe a tweet somewhere that the product team using Command posted a link to their public roadmap from. So that user comes in, they don't have a Command account, but I need one in order for them to vote and to comment on the different cards that team has put onto their roadmap as things they might work on. What I need is a logged in user in order for that vote and comment to work. So what I need to do is give them a way from that public roadmap to both create an account and get back to where they were. And so what we're going to look at in this tutorial is how I set up Command so that that whole process works. So somebody can go from a public page, create an account, do all the stuff they need to do, and then make it back to exactly what they were looking at. So that way the user experience for them is super managed and super clean, so that they don't have to kind of find their way again after they've created an account. They're not like, oh, what did I do? Where do I go? So what we're going to look at in this tutorial is how I used a combination of local storage and browser redirects to bring all that stuff together. So if you're ready, let's get started. Okay, so what I want to show you is how I'm going about managing this whole redirect flow and keeping track of where things are at. Because the problem that I'm trying to solve, and let me show you. So here I'm on the public roadmap for a product inside of Command, and this one is called chips, like potato chips. This is just randomly generated data that I use to test my stuff, and you'll probably see some fun, does it work after all that BS? You'll find some fun test data for myself when I get frustrated. So what we can see here is I've got releases that are currently available on the public roadmap. We've got stuff that's coming soon or just in the works. And then we've got this section called Under Consideration. And the idea for Under Consideration is that this is a space where a product team can get feedback immediately from either current customers or people who are potentially interested in becoming customers. So what this is literally doing is allowing a team to expose what they're thinking about working on. So you'll notice the naming here is you've got available now, so stuff that you've actually put out. Coming soon is stuff that you've committed to and you're in the process of working on. And then you've got under consideration, which is we've talked about it and we've documented it in the form of a card, but we haven't actually committed ourselves to it yet. And so the idea here is that a team can put their cards out to the public to say, hey, give us feedback, tell us what you want. And so that's what this list is all about. This is just all of the stuff that you've purposefully exposed to the public in your cards list inside of your dashboard in Command. And so let's just take, does it work after all that BS? So the problem that needs to be solved, and the problem that I'm going to kind of teach you how to work around here, is that when you open up a card, and right now I'm logged out. I'm not an actual user. I'm just somebody who stumbled upon this. And you'll notice that everything is wired to a URL. So right now I'm on the considering page of the roadmap, and I'm looking at this specific card. And if we close that out, you'll notice the card goes away, and if we switch, we can see the card ID changes. So we're keeping track as the user kind of bounces around this public roadmap, like what are they interested in, what are they up to? But there's a problem, and that problem is if they're not currently a user and they're not logged in order for them to vote or in order for them to comment, we need them to be a user. And that's not a requirement of Command, that's just kind of the nature of the beast. Because if we're going to log a vote, we need to associate it with a user. Otherwise, somebody could just scam this and they could just, vote something into infinity. Same thing with comments. We don't want people to just be spamming stuff on here because it's, it could be a robot or it could be just some jerk who just decided to be, a pain in the ass that night and just leave a bunch of nasty comments. So to get around that, you'll notice that right now the button for the comment form says log in to comment. And so if I go ahead and click this, you'll notice that I get booted to the sign up page, but something special happens. So I get this URL where it says /signup and then it says question mark redirected from equals roadmap. So what I'm doing here is I'm telling myself this user is trying to sign up from the roadmap. So they triggered this redirect from the roadmap. That's where they were. And so what I can do now is change how this page behaves or change what it does. And you'll notice here that I've already done the thinking on this. So I'm not implementing this with you. I'm just kind of walking you through how I did it so you can leverage this kind of concept in your own product. So what I've done here is I've said, well, and let's make sure this is clear. So I'm going to copy that and take it off. But we're just going to hit the sign up page directly. And we'll notice that everything just changed. So by default, when somebody logs in, I'm saying, get your product under control and you can give command and its full set of features a try free for 14 days. So that's the standard sign-up page that I want people to see regardless of where they came from. So if they just came to the site and said try it free, this is what they're going to see. And you'll also notice the button here says start a free 14-day trial. But if we go back, and actually let me just paste in or redirected from. So we'll notice here I'm saying redirected from equals roadmap. And now I know that the context for that user has changed. It's no longer just somebody who's kind of blindly interested in signing up for command. This is somebody that's interested in signing up for the explicit purpose of giving feedback or for voting on something. And so what I've done is I've taken this query parameter and I've told myself, okay, they came from the roadmap, so we want to display information that's going to be relevant to them and to set context around what it is that they're doing. So in this case, I'm saying, oh, hey, you're excited to give feedback? Great. Sign up now to leave comments and vote on the things you'd like to see in chips. And you'll notice that I'm also pulling the product name to further add to that context. So it's not just sign up now to leave comments and vote on the things that you'd like to see, which has some meaning but isn't 100% all the way. But by adding in chips, that's kind of looping back mentally for them, like, oh, okay, you were looking at this thing. Let's close the loop for you. So you'll notice that the header and the subtitle change, but then also the button. So I don't want them to think that they're starting a trial. And more importantly, I don't want them to start a trial. I just want them to sign up either with an email or with one of the OAuth providers. Because the goal for them isn't to start a trial on my app. The goal for them is to vote or comment on a feature or an idea that they saw for a product that they like. And so what's interesting about this, and this is a good little side tangent to go on here, is thinking about how you can design your product in ways to indirectly bring people in. Because the thing that may not be immediately clear here, and let's go back. So the goal of the public roadmap is primarily to have people who are using command to build their products. It's to help them promote it and get feedback and figure out what direction to take. But, and this is the clever part, I'm able to piggyback on that reality of them collecting feedback using command to also promote command indirectly. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, log into comment, doing all this. What I've just done by having somebody sign up to do the votes and all of that, yes, I'm ultimately going to redirect them back to that card and they'll be able to vote and comment and all of that. But what I now have is an account for that user. And so what's neat about this is I'm able to retarget that user. So generally speaking, the people who are going to be voting on products or voting on features for products or commenting on features for products, they're going to be most likely more toward the like geeky developer side. That doesn't mean that's always going to be the case, but it's more likely than it isn't. And so what I can do now, and this isn't something I've implemented, this is just kind of a stored in the noodle thing, is I can now take that email address or that user information and I can retarget them so many days, weeks, months down the road. I can say, hey, you gave feedback on this. Do you have your own product that you manage? Or if I can kind of tell that, okay, this person is just interested in giving feedback, like maybe they're an early adopter and they just like playing with new tech, I can send them recommendations for other products. And then they become an evangelist for roadmaps on the command, because then they can say, oh, well, I saw this cool product here and I saw this cool product here. And it just kind of adds to that organic growth. So that's the both the technical side and kind of the business side of this decision. But the question that may not be, or the answer that may not be immediately obvious is, well, how did you do that? So that's what we're going to look at now. Okay, so now I've moved us over to the code, and what we'll notice is up here I'm inside of a component called Composer. And back in the UI, I went back to the public roadmap here, and I've loaded up the under consideration list. And if we go back to a card that we want to comment on, this whole thing right here, so the button and this markdown supported and this input here, that's the Composer component. So what I know is that, okay, when somebody is on this card view or the view card component and they're trying to type a comment, they're going to hit a point where I need their account in order to log that comment. So what I'm saying is, if we go down to our code, where is it? Get issue status, no. Here we go, logged in user. So what I'm telling myself is there a logged in user? So here I'm checking, in this case, Meteor user ID. So if Meteor user ID is null, then I know that, okay, there's no logged in user. So I'm saying, I'm using a double bang here to say, convert the result of this to a truthy or falsy value. So in this case, if Meteor user ID is null, the double bang is going to convert it to a false. If it has a value, meaning I get a user ID, then I just want to convert that to true, meaning, hey, somebody's logged in. So with that, what I'm doing is I'm saying, all right, for this button, if there's a logged in user, go ahead and add the comment. I don't need to do anything special. But if there's not, so here we're using a ternary operator to say, if this is true, do this, so show add comment. But if it's not true or else, show login to comment. And that's what we're seeing right now. So there's no user present. And so with that, that kind of sets the context for the user, and then to actually handle that or negotiate that, I'm saying, okay, if there's a logged in user, we want to handle the process of adding a comment, but if there's not, I want to handle the process of logging into comment, and that's what we care about for this tutorial. So if we jump up to that function, what we'll see is not a whole lot going on. This is pretty lean in terms of the tech that's needed to do this. So what I know right now is they're on the roadmap, and they're looking at a specific card, and they're trying to comment on that card. Okay, so that's one. Now two is, that's great, but I need to log them in or sign them up in order to let them comment. And so what I need to do is keep track of where were they, what were they looking at, and then where do I need to send them. So I need to solve those two problems. And you'll notice here that all I'm doing is I'm pulling the location that they're currently looking at off of props. And just to make a note about this, this is more of a party trick than anything. So because I'm inside of this Composer component, and this thing is nested inside of the comments component, is nested inside of the view card component, is nested inside of all that, like it's really buried. So as opposed to passing down all of the history and location data for the route, what I can do is utilize the with router higher order component from React Router DOM, and I can say, okay, take that, and we'll look at the bottom of the component here, and I'm wrapping the Composer component that I'm exporting from this file with the with router function that's exported from React Router DOM. So what that achieves is back up here. It gives me access to things like the location, so the current route location, and it also gives me the history object, which allows me to manipulate the history of the browser. And so by default, those things aren't available, but using with router, they are. So with those in tow, now I know, okay, this is the path that the user is looking at, and search here is the query string. So that's everything after the question mark in a URL. So if I had like pizza equals supreme, so this would be a query parameter. If we go back to the browser, that's all of this stuff. So what I'm trying to do is say, well, I need to know what they were looking at. And in this case, what I've done is I've told myself what they're looking at by putting a direct URL along with a ID of what they were looking at. So all of this tells me, so I know that they're looking at this product, and they're looking at this product's roadmap, and they're on the considering tab for that product's roadmap, and they happen to have this card open. So this one string tells me everything I need to know in order to get the user back to where they were after they've signed up for an account and they're logged in. So with all of that known, now what I'm going to do is say like, well, I have to put that information somewhere because what I need to do is move them to the sign up page, so it's not going to stay where it is, meaning this URL is not going to stay the same. I can't expect that to be there. But what I can do is take advantage of things like the browser's local storage and other things like cookies and just any browser storage mechanism really. And so the way that I like to go about doing that is a library called StoreJS. And so this is on NPM. This is a phenomenal package. This is a kind of a lingua franca of browser storage APIs. And said in a less dorky way, what this is doing is it's simplifying the process of talking to all of these different browser storage APIs into a very streamlined .set or .get API. So the difference here is depending on which browser storage mechanism I'm using, I'd have to do like local storage.set or session storage.set or webdb something. Basically, I'd have to have all these API specific functions and stuff. It's just basically messy going on in my code. So what this does is it streamlines that, and it also makes sure to pick the one that's actually available to that current browser. Meaning I don't have to check and see, is local storage available? Is session storage available? Blah, 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 blah. It's just going to give me access to whatever I need to use while also simplifying the API for me. So it just makes life super easy. So as we can see here in the docs, all this is saying is we pass the name that we want to set in the local storage convention, whatever it is, and then we pass the data that we want to set. So back over here, if we go to handle login to comment, you'll notice that I'm saying, okay, I want to set a variable on local storage called command roadmap redirect, and I'm going to set that to an object that contains the return URL, which again is going to be what's up here when they're looking at like whatever they're looking at on the public roadmap, as well as the product name. And the product name I've passed down from above, so that's just something that I have access to inside of this composer component, but I'm going to pass that along as well. So that's step one. So I'm saying set that to local storage, and then step two is, okay, now we need to boot them over to the sign up page. But remember, we also need to tell ourselves that they were redirected from the roadmap. And so this is saying, and this is the React Router history.push method. So this literally pushes a new value onto the browser's history stack, which also triggers a redirect to that page within React Router, which is pretty neat. So what this is saying is go to the /signup route with this as the query parameter, so redirected from equals roadmap. So now back here, if I come down here and I click on login to comment, we get what we'd expect. So we get here, and then the part that may not be immediately clear is like, well, wait a minute, how did all this change? That's where our local storage comes in. So if I go to inspect here in the browser, and I go to application, and then over here I've got access to all the different browser storage types. So we can see here I've got local storage on localhost 3000, which is the current domain that I'm on. And if we look in here, we'll notice that we've got command roadmap redirect. And you can also see a prior version of this, which is kind of cool. You can see how I've evolved through this idea. So here we've got command roadmap redirect, and if we look, we'll notice that that's set to what we just placed back over here. So we've got our return URL and our product name, and that matches the object we get. It's pretty neat. And just to make sure this is clear, so I'm going to trash that, and I'll trash that old one too. And what we're going to do is go back here. So let's refresh on this page, and then let's watch this actually happen in real time. So if we come down here and we say login to comment, we'll notice that almost instantly we got that set onto the local storage. So now I have access to that up here in my UI. And so if we look back at the code, make sure, did I break anything? No, I was talking about pizza. All right, so over here in the sign up component, and the sign up component in this case is this entire page. So this is everything you see on screen right now is the sign-up component. And what I'm doing in here is I'm saying, okay, when that component is going to mount, and here, this may be a little bit confusing, but what I'm doing is I'm making sure I'm on the client, or I'm rendering this on the client. And the reason why is that certain pages inside of command are server-side rendered, so I don't want to try and use client-only code in a server context. It'll throw a bunch of errors. So once I can guarantee that I'm in a browser, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the query params. Now again, the query params are everything after this question mark. So in this case, the only query param is redirected from. So that's my query param, and that parameter's value is roadmap. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a library called QueryString. And QueryString is super useful. So all it really does is it takes that query string and it converts it into objects, and it allows you to manipulate that value on the browser. But it does it with a really elegant API. So what we can see here is I've got a variable I'm creating called queryParams, which is equal to that packages .parse method, and to that I pass location.search. Now location is a global variable that's available on the client. That's not something I set, that's just organically available in web browsers, which is pretty cool. So that location object contains a .search parameter, which is literally this whole search part right here. So if we open up our console, so we go over here and then I just say location, we can see I get back this whole object with a bunch of stuff on it, one of which is search, which again is just our query string or query search or our search string. It's got a bunch of different names. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, take that string, and now this function is going to convert it into an object for me. So I expect query params to be an object. And I don't know if I can, let's try and get away with this just so we can see it kind of at play. Can I do this? We're going to try it. We're going to be cavalier. It didn't break. Yeah, it did work. Cool. So I can say querystring.parse location.search. Now I'm just here in my console. So if I do that, notice this is what I'm getting back. So I get an object with one property redirected from. So back here, that's what's contained by this query params variable. It's this exact object that we can see here. So if we look a little bit further down, the next thing I'm doing is I'm creating another variable called redirected from, but now I'm using the lodash.get method. And this one is super neat. This is hands down one of the favorite things that somebody showed me in the past few years. So lodash.get is saying, given this value, I'm going to try and get this property from it. So this value meaning an object. So from this object, I want to get this property. And if it exists, just return it to me, or in this case, store it in this variable. But if it doesn't exist, I want you to return null. So basically, if for some reason there weren't any query params, or redirected from wasn't set properly, or just something got mangled, I know at the very least that this code isn't going to fail. So this is getting around things like query params and query params dot redirected from and blah, 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 that nasty mess of chained values. This one function is going to basically mitigate all of those problems for me. And so what I'm saying is if redirected from is set, that's wonderful. So the next thing I need to do is kind of figure out, well, where were you redirected from? Now, I can tell you that currently there's only one place, which is the roadmap, and that's probably going to remain true for quite a while here. But still, this allows me to have multiple use cases if I need to. So I'm saying if redirected from equals roadmap, then I want to do this. So in this case, and I could probably rewrite this now that I'm looking at it, I could simplify this to something like, is that right? Am I crazy? Get rid of that doodle. Let's move this back. There we go. So if redirected from is defined and it happens to equal roadmap, then I want to get the redirect data. Now this is the magic part. So you'll notice I'm calling to store.get, which is the complement to the store.set that we saw earlier. So we set it, and then later when we need to reference it or retrieve it, we get it with store.get. And we use that name here, so command roadmap redirect that we passed here. And back in the browser, if we go back over to application, we'll notice that that same exact name is here. And all of those sync up. So quite literally, whatever we set it with is what it's stored with is what we retrieve it or get it with. And so here redirect data is going to equal this object that we see here. So it's going to be an object with a return URL and a product name. So before we get too deep in the woods here, what we'll notice is that the final step of this logic is I'm saying this.setState header variant to roadmap, and then product name is equal to redirect data.product name. And so what these two things are doing are they're helping me to make this possible. So excited to give feedback and sign up now to leave comments. And what I mean by that, if you remember earlier, I showed you that by default this is what the sign up page looks like. However, if we're redirected from the roadmap, it looks like this. So that's what's at play here. So I'm saying the header variant is roadmap, which means I want to change the title and the subtitle to this. And then product name here is being set so we can reference it right here. And so the way that this is all kind of coming together here is we're saying, okay, set that all on state. And then we'll notice down here, where did I put it? I know it's here. Here it is. So I'm saying header content.title, header content.subtitle. So those are just variables, those are placeholders. And we can see right here I've got header content is equal to this.get header content. So get header content, if we come up here, this is this big old gnarly object which has two properties on it. It should look relatively familiar based on what we just saw. So we've got default and roadmap. So roadmap here, and I'm trying to keep this in scope, roadmap here is equal to the header variant that we're setting here. And we'll notice that back up on the default state value, I set default as the default header variant, meaning if I haven't redirected somebody from somewhere and I haven't changed the header variant, I want to load the default version. So back down here we can see we've got an object called header variant, which has a default option and a roadmap option. And so that default option contains a title, subtitle, and button text. And then roadmap contains title, subtitle, and button text. And we'll notice that on the roadmap variant, the subtitle also embeds this.state.product name, which we know will exist if we were on the roadmap header variant because we set it all at once right here. So what's happening at this point is I'm saying, okay, these are my options. And then to get my option, I use the, I want to say something target syntax or bracket syntax notation or some ridiculous name. I just call it the neat way to directly reference a property on an object. So what I'm saying here is this.state.header variant is going to match one of these two properties on this object. And we'll notice that I'm setting this whole chunk of code equal to the variable header variant. So I'm trying to say, what is the current header variant content that I'm trying to get back? And so by writing the syntax like this, I'm saying, find the option matching this state header variant on this object, and this object is literally this part right here, and I'm saying just return that value to me. So the end result of this chunk of code is that header variant here is going to be assigned to the property on this object that matches the current value of this state header variant. So in our case, if it's roadmap, we're going to get back this as header variant. And so you'll notice down here I just return header variant from get header content. So end result of all of that is that down here header content now is equal to this object. So with our title, subtitle, and button. And then that's it. So we have our header content title, header content subtitle, and then down here you also notice I do the header content button. And so back in the browser, if we drop this query param, we'll go for the default route. So right now this is the default header variant. And if I go back to redirect from roadmap, this is now the roadmap variant. So that's it. That is how I wired that up. Now, there's a lot more detail here, so we're not going to go into the full implementation here because honestly it would take a little bit to explain it all. But that is a really quick and dirty way to improve the UX of your product. by managing state as users move between routes. Because it's not really necessary to drop that context for them, unless you just feel like being lazy. But if you don't, then you can use tools like this to really improve moving your users between different views and different contexts without having to lose that information about where they were or what they were doing. And it makes it a much smoother experience for your customers as opposed to just kind of randomly tossing them to different places and not really keeping them up to date on what's going on. So with that, that is going to do it for this week. Like I always say, please subscribe. Down below there's the red subscribe button and the little bell next to it if you want to get notifications as soon as these are posted. But also make sure to follow Clever Beagle on Twitter, so that's at CLVRBGL on Twitter. And we're at /CleverBeagle on Facebook and Clever Beagle on Instagram. That one I update from time to time. That's a cool behind the scenes look at what I'm up to, because I always post stuff from my office while I'm working throughout the day. All right. So, signing off for the HMS Beagle. I'll see you next week. You just listened to me run my mouth for the better part of an hour about a bunch of really technical code. So why not commemorate that experience by watching another tutorial and having an absolute psychological meltdown?